I was sitting in my brother's mansion, watching as champagne flutes clinked under crystal chandeliers. My mother's 60th birthday party was in full swing, and everyone who mattered in the New York art scene had been invited. Everyone except me, apparently. I'd received my invitation 3 days ago, a last-minute courtesy after my aunt asked why I wasn't on the guest list. My sister Vanessa, draped in designer silk, tapped her glass dramatically. "A toast," she announced, commanding the room with practiced ease. Everyone turned, conversations halting mid-sentence, to our incredible mother, who taught us all about excellence and achievement. The crowd murmured appreciation. Vanessa's eyes found mine across the room, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "And to my sister Eliza," she continued, "who's still following her creative pursuits." She emphasized the word like it was a disease. "Maybe one day you'll join us in the real world, darling." Laughter rippled across the room. My father's business partners chuckled. My brother Julian smirked into his champagne. My mother simply looked away, her silence more damning than any words could be. I didn't react. I'd perfected the art of the neutral face years ago. But inside, something hardened. Not broke, hardened. Like ceramic in a kiln, what had been soft clay solidified into something unbreakable. They called my art useless, a hobby, not a career. They mocked my tiny apartment and thrift store clothes. They introduced me as the artistic one, with thinly veiled pity. 5 years later, I bought them front row seats to my reality. The message arrived in my family group chat on a Tuesday morning. I was in my studio in Berlin, hands stained with indigo dye, when my phone buzzed. "Vanessa, did anyone else see the Vogue feature? Apparently, Eliza's little projects are now being called revolutionary. No congratulations. No pride. Just disbelief wrapped in quotation marks." I placed my phone face down and returned to the massive textile installation hanging before me. 30 feet of hand-woven fabric, dyed using techniques I developed after 3 years of research across rural Japan and Indonesia. The piece would hang in the MoMA next month. The advance from the commission had just paid off my student loans. My assistant Sophie walked in with coffee. "Your sister again?" I nodded, not looking away from my work. "She still thinks I'm playing with yarn." Sophie snorted. "While wearing Louboutin that you basically paid for. Didn't your licensing deal with that Italian fashion house basically save your father's investment firm?" I just shrugged. They don't make those connections. What my family never understood was that I wasn't rebelling by choosing art. I was following something elemental, something I couldn't ignore if I tried. While Vanessa climbed corporate ladders and Julian expanded our father's business, I was traveling to remote villages, learning dyeing techniques that were centuries old. I slept on dirt floors, ruined my hands with chemicals, and learned languages just to understand ancient methods that were disappearing. They saw photos of me covered in dye and called it playing with colors. They didn't see the innovations I was creating by fusing traditional methods with cutting-edge technology and sustainable practices. When Julian's wife asked me to design something simple and cheap for their summer home in the Hamptons, I declined. 2 months later, similar designs of mine were commissioned for the Guggenheim at a price that would have bought their beach house outright. They never mentioned it. The invitation sat on my desk for 3 days before I decided to open it. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed with my father's company logo. They were celebrating their 40th anniversary with a gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the same museum that was opening a permanent installation of my work the following month. I traced my fingers over the gold lettering of my name. It wasn't a reconciliation, it was optics. After the New York Times profile called me the most innovative textile artist of the century, suddenly I was worth acknowledging. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Did you get the invitation?" she asked, not bothering with hello. I did. "We need you there, Eliza. It would look strange if you weren't." Not, "we want you there," or "we miss you." Just, it would look strange. 5 years of minimal contact, and this was her concern. "I'll check my schedule," I replied, knowing full well I was free that night. I'd make her wait for my RSVP like they'd made me wait for basic respect. "Don't be difficult," she sighed. "Your father has important clients attending." "I'm never difficult, Mother. I'm just busy with my little hobby." The silence on the other end was telling. She remembered saying those words, at least. That was, "We didn't understand what you were doing then." And now? Another pause. Now everyone seems to think it's important. Not, now we see your value. Just, other people think it's valuable. I hung up without confirming. The morning of the gala, I woke to headlines about my collaboration with a major fashion house. The sustainable textile line I developed had just been valued at 8 figures. My phone buzzed incessantly with congratulations from colleagues and friends. Nothing from my family. I dressed carefully that evening, choosing a gown made from fabric I'd designed, a shimmering material that changed colors with movement and temperature, created through a technique I'd pioneered. No designer label, just my own work on my body. When I arrived at the Met, photographers called my name, not because I was Gregory Winter's daughter, but because I was Eliza Winters. My parents watched from the red carpet, their fixed smiles not quite reaching their eyes. Vanessa sidled up to me at the champagne fountain, her diamonds catching the light. "I see you're making quite the entrance," she said, her voice honeyed with forced cheer. "Just showing up," I replied. "Like you asked." "Well, Dad's thrilled you're here. You know how important appearances are." I took a sip of champagne. "Is that why I was invited to your wedding 2 days before the ceremony? For appearances?" Her smile faltered. The invitation had arrived by email, so last minute it might as well have been an afterthought. I had been in Japan, researching indigo dyeing techniques in a village without reliable internet. By the time I received it, they were already married. "You were unreachable," she said defensively, "always off in some remote village playing with fabric while the rest of us lived in the real world." "The real world?" I echoed. "You mean the world where Dad's company just licensed my play fabric for their corporate headquarters? The same fabric currently hanging in museums on 3 continents?" She blinked rapidly. "That was a business decision." "Of course it was. Everything is with this family." I moved away before she could respond. As I crossed the room, I noticed several guests pointing discreetly to my dress, whispering about the impossible fabric that seemed alive with color. A curator from the Met approached me about a private viewing of my upcoming collection. My father interrupted, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder. "There's my girl," he boomed, as if we'd been close all along. "Let me introduce you to some people who've been dying to meet the artist in the family." It was the first time he'd ever called me an artist instead of a disappointment. The evening progressed with painful predictability. My parents paraded me before their important connections, suddenly proud of the daughter they'd once asked not to mention her crafting hobby at family gatherings. Julian, who'd once told his children not to waste time like Annalisa, now spoke enthusiastically about my creative genius. I played along, smiling and shaking hands, but inside I was cataloging every slight, every dismissal, every moment they'd made me feel less than because I chose a different path. Not out of bitterness, but because I wanted to remember the contrast between then and now. I wanted to remember what it cost to stay true to myself. During dinner, I was seated at the family table, a place I hadn't occupied in years. My father stood to give a speech about legacy and vision, about building something that lasts. His eyes swept over his children, Vanessa the corporate lawyer, Julian the finance mogul, and finally me. "And sometimes," he said, raising his glass, "vision comes in forms we don't immediately recognize. Sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what we plan, but what we're wise enough to finally see." It wasn't quite an apology. It wasn't even an admission of wrongdoing. But in my family, it was as close as it got. After dinner, I slipped away to a quiet gallery where some of my early work was displayed, pieces my family had never bothered to see when they were first exhibited. I stood before a tapestry I'd created during those lean years when I lived on ramen and worked 3 jobs to buy materials. My mother's reflection appeared in the glass beside mine. "Your father means well," she said quietly. "We all did." I turned to look at her directly. "Did you?" She looked older in that moment, the careful makeup not quite hiding the fatigue around her eyes. "We wanted security for you. We'd seen too many talented people end up with nothing. So instead of supporting my talent, you mocked it." She flinched. "We were wrong." 2 decades of waiting for those words, and they landed with surprising emptiness. "Yes," I agreed. "You were." "Is that why you did all this? To prove us wrong?" I laughed then, genuinely amused. "That's the saddest part, Mother. I didn't do any of this for you. I did it despite you." Her face fell slightly, and for a moment, I saw something like real regret in her eyes. "The museum called," I continued. "They're naming the new textile arts wing after me. The same wing Dad tried to get named after himself last year." I didn't wait for her response. I didn't need to anymore. Later that night, in my hotel room overlooking Central Park, I opened my laptop and pulled up an old folder labeled Remember. Inside were screenshots of text messages, emails, and photos. A digital archive of dismissal and doubt. My father, after my first solo show. "When are you going to get serious about a real career?" Vanessa, when I declined a job at her law firm. "Enjoy poverty for your precious art." Julian, introducing me at his son's birthday. "This is Aunt Eliza. She makes blankets or something." My mother, refusing to attend my graduation from art school. "I can't celebrate choices that will hurt you." I didn't keep these to nurture resentment. I kept them to remember that validation comes from within, that the path to success isn't always conventional, that sometimes being misunderstood is the price of being revolutionary. My phone pinged with a new message. My agent, confirming that the Tokyo Museum of Modern Art had just purchased my collection for a record sum. Below that, a message from the Sustainable Fashion Consortium I'd helped establish in rural communities across Southeast Asia. The program had just provided its 1,000th grant to women artisans preserving traditional techniques. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in my childhood city, not because my family finally saw my worth, but because I had never needed them to. The little girl who'd hidden her drawings under her bed for fear of ridicule had built an empire out of color and texture and vision. They called my passion useless. They mocked my dedication as delusion. They dismissed my art as a phase. Now my designs hang in museums they attend as guests, not patrons. Now their wealthy friends commission my work for sums that make them flinch. Now textile students study my techniques in programs I've endowed at universities that rejected me. The greatest revenge isn't making them see your worth. It's reaching the point where their opinion of your worth doesn't matter at all. In my studio in Berlin the following week, I started a new project. My hands moved through indigo-stained water, transforming white cloth into gradients of blue so deep they looked like midnight. My phone buzzed repeatedly. My family's group chat exploding with news of the Met Gala, of my father's speech, of connections made. I let it buzz. The validation I'd once craved from them seemed small now, almost quaint, compared to the vastness of what I'd built. Not just a career or wealth, but purpose, innovation, preservation of ancient knowledge, support for artisans whose skills were being lost to time and poverty. A young apprentice watched me work, her eyes wide with admiration. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you know it would all be worth it when everyone told you it wasn't?" I smiled, immersing another length of fabric into the dye bath. "I didn't know it would be worth it to them," I told her. "I only knew it was already worth it to me." And that, in the end, is the only measurement that matters. If you've ever been undermined by the people who should have supported you most, if you've had your passion dismissed as pointless, or your dreams mocked as delusions, this message is for you. Keep going. Your worth isn't determined by their understanding of it. The path less traveled isn't empty, it's just not crowded. And sometimes walking it alone is what makes you strong enough to lead others when the time comes. Have you ever pursued something everyone told you to abandon? Did you persist or give in? Share your story in the comments. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And remember, validation is wonderful. But it's not validation if you had to force them to see your value. By the time they recognize your worth, you should be too busy creating your future to care about their belated approval of your past. Subscribe if this resonated, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, create with courage.